Legal disclaimer. Bespoke Group investment advisory services are offered only through Bespoke Advisory, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Everything we share here is just for information and education. It's not investment, legal, or tax advice. Bespoke does not offer or solicit investment services to the general public. And as always, investing comes with risk, including the possible loss of principal. I want to just give a little bit of context for the listener of who you are and your background. I mean, when I read your bio, it says that you have led thousands of investigations into fraud, money laundering, embezzlement, and trafficking networks. So I would love to hear a story, if there's something that you can share, of, a specific case. But I guess before we get to that, I am curious to just hear, what got you into this world of privacy and security and, tracking down bad guys? What really drew you to this work, Mark, if that really is your real name?
I have other aliases out there, but that is my true name here. So thanks for not doxing me. My career kind of took a circuitous route. I went to law school in the late 2000s. And my whole trajectory was trending towards being a prosecutor. I had the internships for that, really cool spots where I was actually in the Rackets Bureau in Brooklyn, working all these organized crime cases, human trafficking, kind of these, big interesting cases. And then there was one day at the end of, one of my internships at the DOJ, actually, where it just hit me that I didn't want to be the person to say you should go to jail in front of a jury or anything like that. So, a lot of my background going through law school was based a lot on the investigative process and, how to build cases and things like that. Once I graduated, I ended up working at a bank doing anti-money laundering investigations. So I did that for a couple of years, and that kind of gave me that background, where I kind of married a little bit of what you kind of bring from law to the investigative side, even though that wasn't necessarily like a lawyerly job or anything like that. From there, that's just been a big focus. And, it's kind of one of those things that you land in a certain place. So from there, I did some solo practice, and then I went back in the investigative world where a previous place I interned for, my CEO, who's also a great friend, was starting a new business. And he's like, hey, I'm trying to get the band back together. Are you interested in joining up? So I joined and became the director of investigations there. Did that for about 5 years. And through that process, seen thousands of cases. Some are small, some are bigger, but, seeing the gamut of kind of the complexities that come across in that world. And then, over the past few years, I've kind of been working, I've been with Bespoke, been doing my own law practice as well. And the focus has been a lot of high net worth individuals and a lot of people who are in the Bitcoin world who, the intersection of those two really care about privacy. So a lot of the privacy stuff that I, talk about and deal with is, not only kind of helping them, but also it's backed by all the investigations that I've done, knowing okay, here's how you can connect the dots to find someone this way or that way. So it's pretty useful. It's a practical knowledge. And now it's just a little bit more of the advanced level stuff. And, right now, both with Bespoke and private practice and as an advisor for the security firm I've been working with, that's almost 75% of my day to day.
What percentage of your work is focused on preventative measures? And then what percentage of your work is focused on kind of picking up the pieces after an incident?
Yeah, it's a mix. I'm less involved with after there's an incident. There's a team dedicated to that can actually work to remediate, who are a little bit more tech savvy even. I know my way around tech, but not as much as some other people. So you kind of get the specialists in each area to work on the things. So most of the work I do is preventative. especially as do a lot of estate planning these days, right? So it's building trust LLC structures to help kind of mask where people might live and give privacy, not only where they live, but also their day-to-day business and interactions and how to live their life in a privacy focused mindset.
Okay, so maybe we can save a story from your background a little bit later, because I think there's a good segue right now to kind of talk about the current landscape of privacy for wealth holders and kind of get into more of the specific work that you're doing to help protect families at Bespoke. And I mean, really to position this conversation, I think what privacy and privacy protocol looks like now has probably changed so rapidly to kind of keep up with just the tech revolution that we're in and AI. And so we know that about 78% of family office leaders are now ranking cyber as their top concern. And so I do want to explore kind of like how we're staying ahead of that or approaching the realities of privacy in a tech world. I mean, I even wanted to just ask you, like, does privacy even exist anymore? Like, aren't our phones listening to us? Is privacy possible?
Privacy is possible. One of the problems is privacy. One of the quotes I've heard is privacy is a privilege and it's a job in of itself. So, to the extent that you want to be private, you can do it. And it takes a number of things, right? So if you're starting fresh, it's the easiest place to start a privacy focused mindset, right? Because nobody knows where you are. If you can start a new phone number or whatever, if you want to live off the grid, go to, the mountains in Wyoming and live off the grid or something like that. We can make you a lifestyle of that. No one will ever know where you are. But the reality is most people have complexities and they've actually set up their lives in a certain way. They have their iPhones. They might not have the top security settings on those.
Yeah, I'm like, is there even a fresh start? Like, is that even like, are you actually getting people coming to you who don't have accounts set up that are actually starting from that are starting fresh?
No, but there are some clients that do say, I want to start fresh. They've
Oh, and you mean,
recently, yeah. So they've recently, sold a house, willing to change phone numbers, willing to, change aspects of their life in every way to stay completely private. The most recent one I'll admit to you is probably a little too paranoid and isn't at the risk factor that he thinks he is. But nonetheless, if that's going to make them more comfortable with their day-to-day ops, then, it's something that we provide for them. But, it's one of those things that there's a balance, right? So can you become completely anonymous and disappear from the world? Yes. Do you want to? Probably not. And
why,
especially
why,
if,
why not?
I mean, you told me the other day you went to a theater or something like that. I think you probably want to still do things like that. So, you can make yourself a hobbit, live in the woods, fine. But for most people, especially high net worth people, they want to enjoy the fruits of their labor. They want to go out. They want to travel. They want to, you know, consume. They want to keep running businesses, I think is a big part of it also. Because, a lot of our clients aren't done. They're not saying, okay, I have money. Now I'm going to sit back and do nothing. They're, okay, what's the next? And then you have to figure out the next thing that they want to do, next business for them. How do we backstop it to say, okay, this is what you can put out to the public. This is what you hide.
Okay. Before we get into the process of achieving anonymity or whatever level of anonymity that is, you said something earlier that I had been thinking about, which is that there is a case of a guy who might be leaning on the paranoid side and thinks that he needs more security or privacy than he might need. And I actually thought to myself that like I would 100% be paranoid leaning. So like how do you approach or come to an idea of a grounded, balanced world of protection? Like how do you manage the different sides of the fear or emotional side of it all that people kind of come to you with, you know? So there are some
Yeah.
people who probably should be more paranoid than they are or have a little bit more, you know, awareness of the risk that they're having or care about that. And then there's probably some people who are just like totally on the paranoid side.
Yeah. You know, it's working with them from the beginning of letting them know that there's a balance. So that same client, you know, we're going to do a lot of the same things that we typically would do with clients. Um, and just help coach them that, hey, you know, you have these things in place, be confident in them. But if, you know, something might happen, if a mistake happens, if one little part of this kind of complex web that we set up for you for anonymity breaks down, don't worry about it because the other things are in place. And, you know, at the end of the day, you know, like, remember, this is who you are. You're haven't done any criminal activity. You haven't done this, you haven't done that. Um, you are not at risk or on anyone's crosshairs. So it's, you know, kind of looking back and seeing, okay, what, you know, where was your legitimate concern and what are your legitimate concerns? And here's the plan ahead for you.
Okay. I'm going to get into more serious questions, but first I wanted to ask you about people changing their name.
Yeah. Um, I
Have you
actually,
seen that? Like, is that a measure that you've ever recommended or that somebody would go to?
they have, I haven't seen it with any of my clients. I know it happens often. You know, it's really big in the domestic violence space. Um, so it certainly
Meaning the
happens.
perpetrators of domestic violence would change their name?
Probably, but also the victims because they want to disappear and they want, you know, to have a completely different name.
Oh, okay.
One of the problems is when you have name changes, sometimes you could trace it to the new name if you have the right tools to figure that out. So it's not a foolproof thing. It probably is an okay thing in the case of, you know, domestic violence or something like that, where you're trying to hide from, you know, someone who might have been abusing you. It's not a foolproof one, but sometimes they might not have the tools or access to them to actually, you know, trace it. And you know, some might, but it's a positive step. I think the bigger thing to do, which I've worked with some clients on, is creating aliases and doing a lot of your activity under aliases. So you might still have your official name on, you know, maybe your residence or, you know, this is probably something I think we were probably going to get to down the line, but you could set up different mailing addresses and things like that and have your real name associated with a particular mailing address where they actually even forward the mail to another location that might be a UPS box. So there are things that you could do there that at least your official name is linked to a certain location. And that's, you know, that's also a piece of disinformation that you might put out there. Like, you know, I'm living in Kansas City. I have my address in Kansas City, and then actually be living somewhere else, and you just get your mail forwarded. And where you're living somewhere else, you can do either, you know, living, in a place that an LLC is renting or owns or a trust. And there are different ways where you can mask the ownership of that. Now you're not like masking it to avoid taxes and things like that, but it's just to obfuscate who actually lives there. So we do that with aliases more so in those situations because again, it's a balance, right? You need to have some stuff in your real name and show who you are, and there are forums that you know want to know who you are.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about just how to handle real estate in the case, you know, because it creates a huge data trail. And so what options a family might have if they're wanting to purchase a home and not doing that in their own name. And then what do you do
Mhm.
if you've already done it?
Yeah. So if you're purchasing a new home, the easy answer is you buy it in the name of a trust that you just newly establish. You get a third party trustee is the best way to do it, and have them be kind of the world facing name as the person who's associated with that home. One of the issues when you do it that way is sometimes when you trying to get utilities, you know, they want to know a real person is there to back it, but um, you know, I've seen people work with utility companies to to work with them on some workarounds. And sometimes, if the third party trustee that you have is an individual, maybe you get them to also put their name down on some of that. You're responsible for the bills and everything like that, and there would be a long agreement that says, I indemnify you if anything happens to you as you're under your representation as the trustee of my home trust. And there's ways around it. So it's a little bit of creative planning, and sometimes you have to work with some of those service providers. But once you're there, as long as you don't associate your name with that property, you can be good to go. Leaks happen, mistakes happen, all that. So you can never say with certainty, but you can put yourself in a good position to do that. And then, the key to that is packages, letters, everything goes to these other mailboxes that you can set up as more legitimate addresses.
Okay, so these are kind of some steps that you can take, and I'm thinking that this would be for the person who might be more public than they would. Then now they're realizing they kind of want to pull it back a little bit. These are some of like those steps that you can take. Are there any others that come to mind for that person who is trying to kind of rein it back?
Yeah,
that you haven't mentioned already. You've highlighted some throughout this conversation, but maybe there are others.
Yeah, there's tons, and it's impossible to kind of go through all of them right now. One of the things is everyone has unique circumstances, so you'll see like, okay, they do this or that, but it also involves cybersecurity. So having security networks, firewalls. When you use laptops, the IP address is always linked to your activity there. So air gapping devices is one big thing.
What is it called?
Like air gapping devices. So
I don't know what that is.
It's if you have a new device that has never been connected to the internet and you only connect to the internet brief times on only trusted Wi-Fi networks with firewalls, they won't be linked to various other places that you might live or even areas. So, with a VPN, I could be in, let's say Kansas City again, because we mentioned that before. I could be in Kansas City, but use a VPN that shows that I'm in Europe. So if I'm, doing some activity and there's some little kind of speck breadcrumb that ties me to certain activity, someone like, oh, this person lives in Kansas City. No, they wouldn't be able to do that. They'd be like, this guy lives in Europe. And they'd be like, okay, like Europe's a big span, this country, like, can we even find them there? Probably not. So just things on everyday basis that you could do to mask your address. One example that I've seen is someone will never deliver Grubhub to their home. They'll always deliver it maybe 5-6 houses down the line, and they'll track and see, okay, this person's about to arrive. They'll actually walk over to that house and be like, sorry, I put the wrong address in Grubhub. Here's like the, proof that I ordered it, and then walk it back to their house. So there's little things like that you could do. Same thing with Uber pickups or drop-offs. If you're going from the airport and you get dropped off, you might want to get dropped off a few houses away or around the corner, depending on what the risk profile is. Sometimes that's a little bit much, but it's definitely one of the things that you can do if you want to take it to extreme.
So let's talk more about the just with the digitalization of everything and the threats that happen from. I mean, I've heard you talk before about like not to use a USB port in an Uber. You've talked about not connecting to public Wi-Fi. You've talked about there's certain like, can you just talk about kind of the very common, maybe that seems like maybe more low tech vulnerabilities that people need to be aware of?
Yeah. So one of the things is try not to use Bluetooth or have Bluetooth off when you're not actually using the Bluetooth. That's one way that people can hack into your phones and access them.
What?
Don't ask me how exactly. I just know that it's something that can be done.
What?
So that's one thing. If you're in public places, being in airplane mode as much as possible is a good thing. Faraday bags I don't know if you know Faraday
What?
bags, but
No.
they're a little bag that you can carry around and you can put devices in it. There's multiple sizes, but it blocks all data coming in and out of what's in the bag. So that's a way to protect yourself if you're in a high risk environment or something like that. Again, that's something that a lot of people won't necessarily do, but the biggest things are, avoid public Wi-Fi to the extent that you can. If you're plugging in to charge, don't trust just any outlet, because those can be hacked, and you could actually be connecting to a USB port that's exchanging data. Um, and it looks like you're charging, but it's actually taking data as well. So those are a couple of the things. I know a lot of people I work with will carry on their own Wi-Fi hotspots, and kind of restrict what they do. And then there's also having multiple numbers and devices. So, a lot of people will have their bat phone, where that's the phone that only the people that they trust and know have. And then there's the phone that's more public facing, that you might not have more of your, risky stuff. So if you have one phone that you have, friends, family, your bank accounts associated with it and things like that, that's just kind of a little bit tighter, that would be good. Um, and I say bank accounts, but as there are so many leaks, you might not want that phone number associated with your, more personal secure phone, because banks get hacked and info gets released. So someone might be able to find out, okay, this number of this JP Morgan client is associated with this person. And, you don't know what information goes out there, but based on the information, they might be able to piece together and make you a target based on some of that information.
Are these banking hacks common?
Um, yeah, they are. And it's not just banking, it's everything, right? So utilities get hacked. Everyone's information is out there because there's been so many hacks that if your information is anywhere, it's there. Um, Amazon has gotten hacked and some customer data has been, released. I can't think of the one that was just most recently, but I think it was another billion people had their information exposed. So it's tough, but if you start fresh and kind of gap your links of personal info to accounts, and it's a mix of using VoIP as well, for some of
Video
the
IP?
VoIP,
What is
voice
that?
voice over internet protocol. So Google Voice is one, but wouldn't necessarily recommend Google Voice for some of this stuff. But there's some more privacy focused ones that
Yeah,
you
I
can,
thought that Google was one of the worst when it comes
yeah, that you can
to
use.
people's privacy.
But Google Voice is an example of that.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, I was gonna ask you like what the most common phishing or even you've used the term social engineering, which I thought would be helpful for you to describe, because that's super common. Like, can what are these really, really common ones, and how should somebody be thinking about protecting themselves against that?
So, you know any link you're about to click, any email that you get, um, make sure that you're clicking what you intend to. So one of the things in the AI age and this higher tech age is these spoofing websites where, they make you think that you're clicking the link that you've gone to every time has one slight variation. If there's an I in the middle of the word, maybe they'll put two I's, and because you're not, it's something that you might not notice, that you're actually clicking a link that isn't the official website that you're trying to go to. And then with AI and some of the tools they have now, the entire experience on that website you'd be clicking on will look exactly the way that the normal one does. Will operate the same way, and all that. And I think sometimes they might even be able to mask it, where you might be going to their website and they're actually having you go into their actual account. So you're going to see the real info come up there, but this entire time they're stealing your password and everything. and use it for a future day.
How
One of
is this
the
link coming through?
it could be through an email that looks legitimate. So one of the things that you'll want to do if you think, wait, why is this email coming from this source? If you click on the email, you can see some metadata on it. So you could see who's actually the true sender if it's coming from who it says it is. And sometimes, when you open it up, you'll see, it'll be Mark at yahoo.com will be what appears, right, on the mail header that arrives. But when you click on it, it is actually like, a randomly generated email and number thing at
Meaning like when
yahoo.com.
you click on the email and then you go to the sender and you don't recognize, like it's some
Exactly.
jumbled
Mm-hmm.
email. Okay.
Yeah. So that's one way. And then the social engineering thing, that's a lot of people playing the long game sometimes. So one social engineering kind of work I didn't do any much for the remediation of it beyond helping kind of some of the forensics and dealing with some GDPR issues, but it was an exchange, a crypto exchange. Somebody had been able to get the password of one employee, a low-level employee there, was able to access their Slack and just sit there and listen to, watch all the communications, how people spoke to each other, what kind of requests are made, how is this request made, and all that. They sat there after we did the forensics for 3 months. Sat there for 3 months. Then they saw their opening. From that one, they said, okay, can you please whitelist this one address for this client that we're working on to be able to access the system? And then that was it. Then they got a bunch of information. Luckily, nothing happened to any of the funds at the exchange, but some of the PII, personally identifiable information, was found. That at least it was found that they took it. So that's how a social engineering scam works in many ways. A good example of it.
So social engineering, when I hear that, I initially think like social media, but it's more than that. It's penetrating somebody's life and then understanding the nuances of it to be able to.
Yeah. And it starts from social media in a lot of cases. It starts from other places. So in this one, it was, someone found out that this was an employee at this organization and then studied all of their social media, was able to piece together, where they live, where they're from, all these different things to be able then to figure out what his password was. So it starts there, but a lot of the social engineering stuff is actually like you don't see it because it's been kind of it all comes from an angle that you normally expect would work the way it does, and you don't notice that people have infiltrated your system.
Okay, so when it comes to social engineering, like what are some steps that you can take to prevent this? I mean, I'm assuming having like very strong passwords, two-factor authentication, like password managers, education on not clicking certain links, double checking senders. Is there anything else?
It's a lot of that stuff. One of the things when we look at families, especially high net worth families, is making sure your whole family and the whole team is on board with your
Privacy
with the
plan?
privacy plan. Exactly. Low hanging fruit are often kids.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I was like, I remember you saying that children are often the weakest link.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Kids aren't always thinking that people are out to get them or that they are at risk. And, for rightfully so, you don't necessarily want your kids to kind of grow up being totally
Yeah,
paranoid
living
about
in
those things.
fear.
But there are things you could do, like make sure their security settings on phones are, up to date. Maybe there's ways to restrict how they use and access social media. So one of the biggest things that we always tell all clients is be careful of kind of saying where your location is at any given time. Don't take selfies in front of your house and say, "Oh, I love being here on whatever street it is." Try to minimize that as much as possible, and get your kids to do it also. And then, if you want to promote some of those things, again, the balance is, where's your life? If you're going to a conference, you want to announce that you're at that conference to kind of build excitement for being at that conference and opening up conversations. But you might not want to tell everybody that you're at a Bitcoin conference, for example. Or if it doesn't matter in real time for you to say that you're there, a few days later, you could say it was a great time being at this place and connecting with people, and just keep those kind of locations vague. But a big thing with kids is getting them not to tag their locations. When they want to tag things, avoid them tagging your home and anything that might help identify to people where you live.
So I'm just thinking about how, when it comes to like children or bringing your kid to school or like certain places, certain routes that you take, like sometimes you can even go as far as like changing those so it's not always the same. I mean, how important is it to do that? Are you really recommending that people like make varied routes to work or school?
Depends who it is, but yes. A lot of the clients that we talk to aren't really at the risk profile that they think they are, so we wouldn't necessarily recommend that to them. But if you're the CEO of a major company, that's a step you're going to want to take. Depending on, what your appetite is for security, you might want to have a secure driver take your kids to school. That loses a little bit of the touch, right? I think there's something that parents want to drop their kids off at school and watch them walk up to the steps and everything like that. So sometimes you don't want to take that away from the parents, but if they are high risk, then, you present it as an option and say that this is something that we'd recommend. And then, a major thing, every client that we go through this with, one of the things we encourage is setting up proper monitors. So going back to the case of a CEO, you set up a monitor, linked to their name, emails, activity, just so if someone's talking about them online, if there's negative sentiment, if there's anything like that, you could flag it in advance and say, you know what, sentiment towards you has shifted a little bit in the past month. You might want to be on a slightly higher alert, and you might want to do X, Y, and Z to protect your family.
Wow.
So
You mean like monitoring what people are saying?
yeah.
Reputation.
Mm-hmm.
How do you help people think about like the others potentially in their inner circle, whether it could be friends, family members, or maybe people that they work with? Like, how do you think about that?
So, we tend to advise clients to keep their circles tight and have, I guess, different like eccentric circles of or concentric circles of who they allow into different parts of their life. So, obviously your family's your family. There are business associates that you might not want in on some of those things, but there are some business associates that you would want in on there. Vetting them all is a great idea. So, if you're ever going to enter, and this is all, kind of going forward, sometimes you could do it looking past, but by then a lot of the damage is done and relationships are built and access has been provided. So it's hard to curtail that. But, prospectively going forward, people who you allow in, you should do some level of background search. One of the biggest things that we see with, the high net worth crowd is household staff and service providers. So we encourage doing backgrounds on those folks. And it includes, getting, credit scores if they're willing to give a release to get that, but also just looking at their overall picture Have they recently gotten fired from other jobs? Or are they in the middle of a divorce? Do they have financial strain? There are ways to find out if they have financial strain without actually doing a credit check. You could check bankruptcy records, those are public. So you see, are these people at risk? Do they have a reason to be an access point for bad actors? They might not be bad actors themselves, but might they get bribed and say, hey, we want to do a hit on this house, give us all the access, we'll give you 10%.
Very interesting. So you're saying that a lot of times the motive behind this is financial strain.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes, yeah, for household staff, a lot of times
Wow.
it would be because, um, that's one of the things that a lot of Americans, a lot of people struggle with. You know, you might be someone who doesn't have much who got invited to be a housekeeper. You're in a home that's worth $40 million, let's say. You're going to say, this isn't fair. Why does this person have so much? I'm going to go tell this other person from a neighborhood I was once in that I knew, like, hey, I have an idea. Why don't we do this? Or they can get approached and say, someone that they know might be like, hey, I know you work at this house. Just give me 3 pieces of information and, let me know when they're away. I think one of the things that we've seen recently, which is really wild to me, is there's been a slate of robberies at athletes' homes while they're playing in games. And I just feel like, once you're an athlete on that stage, at least the ones that we've heard, they're bigger players. So like, how do they not have a little bit better security till
Yeah, I know.
You're at a game?
I know our team is passionate about, getting athletes the right support because I mean that is a huge problem also. I mean a lot of these athletes are hitting like their career peak at such a young age, like ensuring that they have the right people around them, helping them not only protect like their financial earnings, but protecting their, their safety, their home, like having the right people around them to do that proper planning is so important.
Yeah. And a lot of times when they're young, it's hard to convince them. But you can. I mean, that's our job to do so.
Yeah, and how many people do you think really need to be like when we're talking about, maybe an early athlete or a professional athlete, sorry, like how many people do you think are necessary to be like on a privacy and security team? I
If
mean for
I
people
mean,
with public who are public.
yeah, I mean, if you're public, you should have at least some level of privacy set up. And the degree varies. Taking the athlete example, if you're a walk on who might only be with the team, for a short period of time, if you're on the practice squad, you have less risk. And the more famous you are, the bigger at risk you are. And that's just the unfortunate reality.
Okay, can we talk specifically about crypto native and Bitcoin heavy folks, whether it's a family or an individual? I remember reading about, well, we all have like kidnappings that have happened because somebody has a target on their back because it's public knowledge that they have significant holdings in cryptocurrency or Bitcoin. How are we thinking about that, and how do you become as much of a ghost? Like, how do you become a ghost? If in this case.
Yeah. A lot of that goes back to some of that balance. A lot of the, people who have made a lot in crypto need to be loud about it and need to be active in the community and space. So how do you find that balance? A lot of it is, I think, disinformation. So some of the tough stuff that we're talking about, homes and where your public address would be, is some of that. Some of that is not announcing where you'll be. So if you're going to speak at a conference, it's a little tough because people will know you're going to be at that conference and they promote that.
Yeah. I
But
think about that a lot.
yeah,
What do you do? I mean, that's just a risk that you accept?
that's a risk you accept, but you treat it accordingly. It might be having private security. It might be, announcing that you're at a particular hotel and be at a different hotel. It could be using aliases when you're traveling in those situations. So when you actually show up to speak, that's the first time someone realizes you are who you are. So some of those things, for the less famous people, if no one knows you're wealthy, keep it that way as much as possible. And, that's the best client we can have because we can put things in place that no one will ever know you're as wealthy as you are. We can add, security protocols for any kind of transfers. So if you do get kidnapped, there's a certain code that you would say during a call if you're trying to authorize a transaction. You could also say, look, my hands are tied. I don't have any of this. It's a 2 of 3 or 3 of 5 sort of signature protocol that we have. Um, and that might be able to help, or they might say, no, like initiate it and get it done. And then you can have a certain code that you can have there.
I have a question about this actually, because I think that, you know, um, more intelligent custody measures have been brought forward. I think, we've seen a ton of development in that space, especially from the genesis of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. Like, do you think that there is less of an incentive now for bad actors when it comes to Bitcoin and crypto because there are more custody solutions? Like, it is becoming more common to not have like a single point of failure when it comes to holding your Bitcoin. It's harder for bad actors to be successful now because people are understanding and becoming more intelligent in protecting their digital asset.
Yes and no. Yes, because of that a little bit. And I would say no because two reasons. One is a lot of Bitcoiners are not my keys, not my coins. So they're not going to set that up. They want to be the only key holder. And, that's their prerogative. But that's still in existence, and a lot of people still espouse that as much as possible. So if you're one of those Bitcoiners who say that, then when you say, look, I don't have control, they'll be like, this is what you say on a daily basis, what are you talking about? And the other reason to say no is they're not, these kidnappings haven't been so common. Or maybe they are and you just don't see all of them. I know hacks are common, so there are way more hacks than you would think that say send me Bitcoin. The kidnappings, you only see when they're reported. So there might be some kidnappings that maybe haven't been reported yet. Probably not. But even a few months ago, there was a kidnapping that was famous. So the reason I say no, it hasn't thwarted them is because it has still happened. And I haven't been able to read it yet. But there was an article in the New York Times today exactly on this and what you might be able to do if you get kidnapped. At least that's what the headline made it sound like. I have it open
Oh
on my
wow,
browser. I'll read
I
it
need to read
later,
this.
but
Send it to me.
I will. But that's one of those, that's one of those things. And then really situational awareness. So what you look like, if you're loud about being wealthy or a Bitcoiner or anything like that, you might want to have private security, or you might want to do a lot of the disinformation so people don't know where you are when.
Can you talk a little bit more specifically about this case of, because and look, maybe it's just my perspective that I feel like the industry and landscape is shifting a bit where people are kind of having a more expanded view on not your keys, not your coins. And maybe that's just because of the work that we're doing that I have that sense or that perception. But for that person who is ready to kind of take a step forward or expand their view of like what sovereignty is, and like maybe I do need to have some protective measures, and maybe I do care about privacy, and maybe I am worried about kidnapping. Like, can you talk a little bit about expanding their view on not your keys, not your coins, so that they can have some privacy benefits?
Yeah. So, there's a mix of ways. It's effectively communicating all the benefits you get from estate planning and say, look, all of this is worth it. Depending on their level of wealth and what they have, a starter might be, okay, why don't you just take a little bit and put it in this protected structure, see how it works, see all the benefits you might get, and then we can talk about doing more and more if it makes sense. If someone has significant holdings, absolutely they should keep some on cold storage. But have something put away in a safer thing where you can, if you do get kidnapped, you can even use that as a plausible thing and say, hey, look, I have this app from my custodian. This shows you that I don't have full control. Maybe they'll believe you that you put all of it in there. Maybe they won't, but it's, one of the things that can help. But yeah, the benefits, I think the benefits far outweigh the cons of giving up some of your keys, just the access to things that make life easier. Bitcoin is great, but sometimes it's not the easiest thing to transact with. So if you have the intermediary, if you have the rails to go directly into the banking system, that's great. One of the things that doesn't get talked about often is, what if you do pass away and it's all cold storage Bitcoin? Even if you left the breadcrumbs for your heirs to receive it, how are they going to use it? Banks will look at that and be like, we don't know where this came from. We don't have, we don't have that trail. We can't take your Bitcoin money. That might be an issue. So creating that story in your estate plan and showing the proof and evidence and the trail and starting that relationship with potential custodians that could help your heirs is also a valuable piece of it.
So, just to kind of pull it all together, like your work is an integration of legal structures, asset protection, digital hygiene, travel protocols, and reputation management. And that is all kind of like the pieces of this privacy planning and system.
Yeah. It all goes together. And it's, one of the things I enjoy is kind of having an imprint on each piece of that. So you feel like you're getting the holistic, the holistic solution that kind of can keep you safe. But nothing is 100% foolproof.
Yeah, you've said before that if there's a will, there's a way. And so I guess part of it is just there's also like an acceptance that has to come to it as well. It's like, okay, I've done these things. I've implemented smart, privacy planning, and then like you have to kind of like leave it up to the greater forces of nature.
Yeah. And you have to be proactive about it. You have to, you keep seeing it. So there's there's different protocols that work today that didn't 5 years ago, and there's ones that will work in 5 years that don't today. AI is changing a lot of that stuff, and we reference how that's helping mimic websites a lot better and can dupe you and things like that. But there's also the voices and images and things like that you can't really tell apart. One thing I saw this past week is the number one country song in the country is AI generated, fully AI
What?
generated. And I played it to a couple of people who like who like country the other day. And I was like, what do you think of the song? They're like, I like it. I like it. I didn't tell them it was AI until there was maybe 30 seconds left. I'm like, it was just AI. And they were like, I
Oh
don't
my
like it
God.
anymore.
Oh my God.
So it's just gonna get better and better. And then, I don't know how much time we have left, but one of the parting shots is go back to the basics. So sometimes flip phones help, right? If you want to communicate and all that, and you see that trend with Gen Z happening, that it's actually kind of encouraging because that is a more secure way to do things. But continuously monitor what your presence is. So the monitoring that we talk about gives you a good picture of what information is out there on you. So once you have the baseline set, it takes a little while to tweak it and make sure that you're capturing everything. But once you're there, you still have to tweak it, every here and there, and kind of think like, okay, I just bought this other place. I want to make sure that that doesn't ever get associated with me. So you fidget around the search terms and the program that you have to make sure that it's constantly up to date with what your real risk profile is. It's a lot of work.
Um, yeah, I'm like, I'm just thinking about how all this is a privilege.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've focused, I want to kind of in the last minutes of this, talk a bit about what happens after, you know, it's privacy or tech or whatever it is has been compromised when something's been breached. Like what happens next? I know you said you focus more on the preventative measures, but I think you do have, you have a team or you have at least an understanding on what happens after. Can you kind of talk about that piece?
Yeah. So, at the very basic level, there are things that are, you do PII removal. So remove certain pieces of information from there. Depending on what gets compromised, you have to take a different approach to how you remediate it. If it's your your devices and all that, you need to get all new devices and set them up again. If it's your home that got doxxed in a place that you can't remove it, if it's the dark web or certain places that's a little bit more difficult, you have to come up with a bespoke solution. Disinformation is a big thing. Sometimes you own it. So like if you own a side home that gets doxxed as yours, you can own it and just make it that you're going to be turning it into an Airbnb or renting it out actively. So to the public, it's not your home anymore. It's just an investment piece. Sometimes it would be just selling that place and starting fresh again. So it depends on what the situation is. And if there's a real risk to your health, bring in security, change protocols. There's a number of things you do, but it just depends on what the situation is. And some of it is the whole cyber thing. So you want to nip that as quick as possible. So if you get hacked or intrusion, or if someone's been living on your devices, you need to end that immediately. Do a scan, get those viruses off. And the biggest work is finding out what they actually might have. And there's ways that you can kind of funnel through the logs of the computers to see what information was accessed. And then you need to remediate. You might have to tell some people. You might have to change accounts. There's a number of things that you need to do, and it's work, but unfortunate part of what we do.
I imagine that this type of work, if it hasn't been done yet for a family or an individual, can be like something that you really just want to avoid or pretend or like kind of ignore because, even to right? When you do these searches, like you're going to find you learn kind of like what the weak spots are. And I imagine that could be very stressful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's stressful. But it's life is stressful, right?
Yeah, and I guess like at least for me, sometimes I know that when I feel paralyzed by something, the like only thing that helps is actually just taking an action, even if it's just like one small step, like, you know, acting kind of helps. Okay, so what are the most common questions or fears that you hear from clients and prospects like right now? And maybe they're not clients or prospects, maybe it's just like within the world of privacy. What are the most common questions and concerns?
A lot of them come from from the high net worth group, especially the crypto ones, about becoming the ghost. That's the number one request that we get. How do I become a ghost? So it's a lot of the conversations that we've been having now. Um, and it's, just kind of worried that their home would get exposed. Thankfully, also, a lot of our clients are very quiet about what they are and, what they have. And that's a privilege to work with them because it's more, preventative of like, we don't want anyone knowing this. What are the steps that we take to make sure? Some of it is doing charitable contributions that they don't want tied to their own name. So, what's the solution for that? There are a couple ways to do it. And you have, kind of third parties that you can trust to kind of be the face of those transactions. And, just figuring out what they need.
I'm even thinking now, like, how do you even trust somebody? Like, why would I trust you?
Look at me.
But like, how does somebody who feels that
Slow.
they're in such a vulnerable position, like, what are the kind of initial questions that they can help them vet and that they can kind of take as they're interviewing or kind of starting to talk to people? What are like those questions that can help them feel like they, can move towards a place of trust?
A lot of it is based on relationships, how they make you feel, but a lot of it is, seeing what their track record is. I think that's the biggest thing when you can talk about stories of this is what we did for this client and that client without giving names or actual details that would be able to track them, but just knowing what you're doing and sounding like you can help them goes a long way. But trust is built over time. I know I've dealt with a lot of people. It took 2 years of conversations to actually get them to a place to actually work with each other. And that's how it goes. A lot of it is reputation. 95% of clients I ever have are referrals from trusted people. So that helps a whole lot. Most people, you know, say, hey, this is someone I trust. You should go to them. And those people are their trusted people, which is a nice place to sit.
I was gonna say, I guess a green flag would be that that the person you're speaking to isn't rushing you. Like, it sounds like, in your approach, you're incredibly patient. If it takes 2 years for somebody to feel comfortable moving the needle, like, then it takes 2 years. I
Yeah,
was gonna ask too, you mentioned how social engineering, like, because in my mind, I'm like, now the time frame, right? Like, people are investing time into achieving something. Somebody's going into a company and learning the nuances of their language and spending 3 months or, like, even getting hired to execute a mission. And I was gonna ask you, like, can you talk about kind of time? Like, how much time is an okay time for vetting and, um, in this case?
that's a hard one to answer. The As long as it takes for the person to feel comfortable is a quick answer. Sometimes you're thrust into acting when you don't have the time to actually get to that point, and that's one thing. I think the way I kind of talk to clients about this kind of stuff is, um, you know, do your research, um, talk to other companies and competitors, and make sure you're comfortable with me or us over them. If you find someone else that you want to work with, go ahead, please. I want you to be happy with what you have. That conversation helps to a certain extent. And, a lot of times they'll go out there. I know there's a lot of security companies that do the same stuff that we did at Polaris. And I look at them and they're like, they'll be like, oh, this guy has X CIA or X this or X that. And like, that's impressive. And you look at it and like, we have the same. Everyone has the same. Every company purporting to do the same thing has the same, except for the ones that might be fraud or lying. So you have to do extra vetting on some of those kinds of providers. Um, but yeah, I've even in some instances told clients to go to a competitor because maybe there was just either a bandwidth thing or just they needed someone to act immediately. And I a lot of times don't want to act immediately on some of these situations. When you're talking about privacy, there's a long intake. So if you're the person who's demanding, I want to be erased tomorrow, we might not be the right fit because we need to take our time, make the right choices, put the right things in place rather than, doing something like haphazardly that doesn't actually work. Not only work immediately, it might work immediately, but back to the lifestyle issue, and it's a trade-off. We might put something in place that you're just not going to follow because it's too onerous. So let's really, understand what your day to day is. What do your kids go to school? How do they go to school? Who are their friends? What do they know about your personal wealth? What do they know about what you do? What do they know about some of your business dealings and things like that? And you need to know that kind of stuff to really help someone, especially if they're interested in solutions for the long term.
And create a totally tailored plan because everyone's circumstances are different and meeting those specific needs.
Exactly. And there's some clients that do some stuff. I'm like, I wouldn't do that. I'm like, it's not worth it. Like you're not getting much benefit from it, and you're just making your life a little harder. One story real quick I wanted to kind of talk about. You're talking about social engineering and how long some of this can take. There's one case. It was a tech company that hired engineers in the COVID world, remote engineers. They thought that they were in Texas, but actually they were in North Korea. And, these two people worked diligently, attended all the meetings, had good English accents, got their work done, were actually productive for the company and helped the bottom line. they waited, and then at one point pulled the plug. So it's, one parting thing on that is again, to reiterate, to continually look at what plan you have and where you are. So, cybersecurity is a big part of that. If you have your own servers, you're going to want to do some pen testing. You're going to want to just have, annual reviews, face-to-face sort of things with employees, and just constantly be vigilant, but not too vigilant that it really puts a damper on your life, is how I would put it.
How can we end this episode on not a low note? I mean, that sounds like really worst case scenario.
Yeah. Well, on the high point, most people are okay. Kind of going back to what we started with. If you have no reason to be in someone's crosshairs, then you're safe. If you have reasons to be in, either you did something bad or you did something great. If you did the great thing to get yourself in that public view, take that as a privilege and an honor, and you can still benefit from it, and kind of live your life the way you need, and kind of do the same stuff that you want to do, whether it's providing to charities, whether it's taking care of your family, whether it's espousing good morals and ideals throughout society. You could still do that. Just a little couple tweaks in your lifestyle will go a long way.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, Mark, thank you so much for answering all of my questions. I know we kind of bopped around and
Thank you. We can go on for days about all this stuff, but
I
I
know.
appreciate doing this.